Hey everyone, welcome to ChaatNChat. My name is Josh.
I'm Miguel Sanchez.
Today is going to be a little bit different because we're not going to be watching a movie. We're going to be talking about us. This is a Q&A video because a lot of people have been asking me tons of questions and it's been suggested to do a Q&A video for quite some time now, but I wanted to wait until we had enough subscribers to kind of make it worth it. I was really worried that I was going to put it out there for questions and nobody was going to respond, but the opposite happened, which is we got a bunch of questions. Some are overlapping, so if I don't hit your question and feature your question here, it might be because it would be covered in another question. But if you feel like I still have not answered your question, feel free to comment in this video and ask your question, and I'll try to respond as soon as possible. So this is actually going to be a real ChaatNChat. We have our snack here, so if you see us eating, this is navratan. Miguel has actually had it before because it is one of my favorite, and I keep it around the house all the time. So if you see us occasionally munching on this, that's what it is. So let's get into it. So the first question we're going to start with is from Gory Tries. And this is actually, I think, a really good one to start with because it is going to be covering a lot of different things. So first up is your background and how did I land up in India? So this one has been asked numerous times and it's kind of an interesting story. So settle in because it is a bit of a ride. When I was younger, my dad, he got a job with the US government, and every couple years we would move from country to country. So one of the countries that we moved to was India. When we arrived there, I got settled into my school, but it was an American embassy school, so there wasn't much outside contact with India. And in fact, I was really closed off from the Indian culture and India in general for quite some time. I didn't even eat Indian food for the first year I lived there. I just went to school, went home, I played video games, and I did not have too much of an interest in going out other than that. One day I got a summer job at the embassy, and when I arrived, I found out I was the only American working in the department. It was a general service office, like a warehouse, basically, moving furniture to U.S. Embassy employees' houses and back and forth, and there's an upholstery shop there. I was really quickly introduced to a lot of locals that lived and worked at the American Embassy. A lot of them did not speak English. My supervisor did speak English, but other than him, English speaking was very far in between. On my first day coming home from work, I knew a handful of Hindi words because as we were moving furniture, people were screaming at me, bus, 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 bus. I'm like, I don't know what you mean, man. And they're like, bus. So that was actually the very first word. Even before I learned namaste, bus was my first word. I actually spent a lot of time with my supervisor, naturally, because he spoke English. We would have lunches together. And then it became common for him to take me to the upholstery shop for a community lunch where everyone that's working in the upholstery shop will sit down in a circle and they would share their food with everyone from their lunch boxes, their dabbas. To this time, I still have not had any Indian food. I've never tried it because looking at it, it looks so different from our food that I'm just like, I don't know. I was not very adventurous back then. I would consider myself adventurous now. Back then I was not. So they would offer me something like saag paneer or chole or aloo gobi, and I would turn it all down. I'm like, oh no, sorry, I already ate. I'm not interested, thank you very much, but no. But there was one older gentleman there that for some reason, and when we look back on it today, we both have the same opinions. And it sounds really cheesy and maybe cringy, but it is quite real that when I first saw him, like literally time seemed to stand still. And he smiled and I smiled. I waved at him. He waved back and I tried to speak to him. And then he said, "Are, sorry, mujhko English nahi aate." And I'm like, what? And I quickly learned he does not speak English. There was just still something there that I felt drawn to him, that I wanted to get to know him. He looked so interesting with amazing silver hair, a white mustache, and he just looked so friendly and kind, and I wanted to get to know him. I started eating lunch with him. I would bring my lunch, and one day he offered me food, and from him, I could not refuse. And so I said, okay, I'll eat it. So the very first Indian food I ever tried was dal makhani. And to this day, dal makhani is still my favorite dish. And
this was homemade.
Yes, this was homemade by his daughter-in-law. So I had some, and I wanted to eat his entire container of it, but then I would feel bad. But he realized how much I loved it, so the very next day he actually brought me my own dabba of dal makhani that his daughter-in-law made specifically for me, because I guess he went and told her the story about this American guy that loved her cooking and wanted more. Every day at lunch, I would go spend time with him. We would eat, but we would get an hour for lunch. We'd generally spend 30 minutes eating, and we'd take.
And this was the group of the circle.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay.
The other 30 minutes of our lunch, we would spend just sitting and talking, and it's interesting how you can start to understand each other even though you don't have a language in common. We would use a lot of like hand signals, like, you know, he was saying like nam, name, and I'm like, okay, I'm Josh, and he's like, Josh, and I'm like, Josh, and he's like, Josh, ye Josh hai, ye Josh, and I'm like, okay, I guess that's a word in Hindi. And then I quickly realized what Josh means, like enthusiasm, zeal, passion, you know, all that. He would start doing things, and I almost learned the language as a child would. I mean, I was a child. No one was translating for me. He would say something in Hindi, and he would do an action, and I would start learning based on what I would see and hear, and I would relate things like that. And I'd say within 2 months, I was able to have like general conversation, like, you know, how are you doing? Aap kaise hain? Main theek hu. Aur aap kaise hain? Main bhi theek hu. Aur mausam kaise hai aaj? This went on for months, and we got closer and closer until one day he found out that I have never been to Agra. Are yaar, ek saal yahin rehte aur Agra kabhi nahi gaye. Kyunki, sorry, because Delhi is not that far from Agra. Right. So it's like you could just hop on a train, get to Agra, and you could even do a day trip if you wanted. And actually, we did do a day trip eventually. So I asked my dad, and he said, yeah, sure, you know, go for it. So we took a day trip, and we got our train tickets. When we arrived to Agra, anyone that works at the embassy gets this card. And with this card, you can get local pricing, because residents of India get a certain price. I think it was like at the time either 50 rupees or 100 rupees. And then the like foreigner price is like 4,000 rupees.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, something like that. It was a big difference. I had this card with me, but then when we got there, I lost the card. So when we got to the guard stand, he gave the tickets to the guard, and he looked at the two local tickets, and he saw me, and he's like, oh, this white boy, like, you know, like, he shouldn't be having a local ticket. What are you trying to pull? He needs to go buy a full price. Tumhara card kidhar hai? Kidhar? I'm like, oh, khol gaye. I lost it. Oh, no. And then he's like, oh, koi baat nahi. Arey, yaar, ye mera pota hai, pota. And the guard looked, and he's like, pota? Haan, Dadaji, chaliye na, kya problem hai? And then I look at the guard, I'm like, koi problem hai ji? He's like, aure, theek hai, chalo. Ever since that day, I mean, I would call him either Dadaji, Dadu. Dadu is more like grandpa, and Dada is more like grandfather. After Agra, we went to Jaipur, we went to Mumbai, we started doing a lot of traveling together, because like I really felt that we had like this familiar bond.
Right.
And
these are bonding experiences between the two of you. And what better way to get to know the local culture than to have someone like that, you know, really teaching you everything about it.
So he started including me in a lot of the family programs, whenever anybody had a birthday in the family, and I would sometimes just go to his house and hang out with the family. And I started getting really close with my chachajis and chachiji, and the food was always amazing because my chachiji makes the best food. And, you know, but in their house, for the most part, we just speak Hindi. And I started slowly learning more and more and more while being around them in the family. I started doing research on my Dadaji's name. His name is Kedarnath. And Kedarnath is another name for Shiv Bhagwan. He started teaching me all these stories about Hinduism and taking me to the temples. He started teaching me the philosophy, all of the major epics like the Ramayana he told me all about, and especially whenever Diwali comes up and we always learn about it. And there is a temple, the Kedarnath Mandir. And Kedarnath Mandir is part of a Char Dham. There's Gangotri, Yamunotri, Kedarnath, and Badrinath. When I found that out, I was like, my gosh, we have to go there. And he's like, oh no, I'm a simple guy. I don't do that sort of stuff. And it's almost like this like pilgrimage that you can take to go to all Char Dham. I said, look, I'm going to make all the arrangements. And we took weeks to go up to the Himalayas. You had to walk. And the walk is it was pretty long. I forgot how many kilometers it was, but the oxygen starts getting less as the higher you go up. Yeah. And so he started taking a break every like 2 minutes. And I was like, oh, this is going to take all day to get up there. So there were these mules. Please, can we take one of these mules? And he's like, no, I'm fine. If you're not going to take a mule, I won't. I'm like, I don't need one, but you should take one. Finally realized, I was like, okay, oh, Dadaji, bahut thak gaya.
Fake it.
Yeah. Then I'm like, please, hum ye to lena chahiye. So he's like, oh, okay, if you're tired, you should definitely get one. So then we got our mules and we went up the rest of the way with the mule. And so when we got up there, there was a Panditji, and he was doing he was doing these different prayer services for people that were coming and visiting. And when I got there, we met him and we were talking with him. And then he looked at me and he's like, is he your family? And then Dadu was like, he isn't blood related, but spiritually, I believe he's like, we're related. And then he's like, let's make it official. So the Panditji had then adopted me into the family, and he even gave me a name, because my Dada's name is Kedarnath, and so then they gave me a name, Joshnath. And so that's actually, if you guys ever notice like tattoos, so this tattoo here says Joshnath because it means a lot, because that's the name, and it was a special moment in my life is when I became part of the family and he adopted me into the family. And the other tattoo that I have that you guys might have seen on some of these videos is I have an Om, and under it says Shri Kedarnathji. So, and that's again very meaningful because not only is it Dadu's name, but it is also like the moment in my life where things changed. In my life, there's before Kedarnath and after Kedarnath, because it is like this big point in my life where things just will never be the same. So after that, I eventually graduated high school, went on to study in Noida for a bit. I found a university in Noida that I studied digital art. I was really interested back when Toy Story, the first one, came out, and I was just like, this is so amazing. I've never seen a cartoon like this before. And my mind was just blown away with the quality of work that Pixar had. Yeah. So I wanted to study that. And actually I had this big, grand idea that I was going to study in India, learn animation there, and then work a studio in India and do Bollywood movies, Disney style and like Pixar style. And Disney actually made one called Roadside Romeo. And so one of the voice actors was Saif Ali Khan, which at the time was one of my favorite heroes. I lasted a year and then I was like, okay, I need to do something else.
Change time.
Yeah, it's time to change. So I ended up enrolling into a university in the US where I came back here, but I missed India so much that I only did a semester here before going back to India to live with him, because it's like this, like there's just this feeling, being away from India that like I just felt so at home being there. And one thing that Dadu and I always talk about is how we believe in
the connection of lives.
Yeah, connection of lives. शायद नहीं पक्का कि हमारे पिछले जन्म में हमारे रिश्ते तो बहुत तेज थे. Because we believe that in one life, if you have a really strong relationship with another soul, in the next life you'll find a way to get back to each other, whether it's grandfather and grandson, whether it's friends, or whether it's spouses, whichever way. Like the world has a weird way of working, but you will work and you will find your way back to each other. I think that's especially important because when I first met him, those were the feelings that I had. I had that connection to him. I had that draw to him. And he says he explains it the exact same way, that he's like absolutely 100% that our, our bond were there. That is how I wound up in India, that I learned Hindi and that I studied. And yeah, so what is another question here? So remember I said it was a multiple parter.
Yeah.
So, okay, I explained, what do you mean by an Indian family kind of adopted you? Well, that's what I mean is it wasn't official like legally, but spiritually, I feel like I'm part of his family. Like he literally, if someone asks him how many grandchildren he has, he includes me. He literally considers me family and I consider him family. Right. And so
it's not a genetic thing either.
Not a genetic thing. I'm not Indian. Although there's this song that I absolutely love from Shri Charsobis. I actually did a reaction video on it. And it's Mere Jutta Hai Japani. Mere Jutta Hai Japani, Ye Pantlu Englishtani, Sir Pelal Topi Rusi Fir Bhi Dil Hai Hindustani. And for me, I added another little extra verse in there, and I would say in that song that, my skin might be foreign, but still my heart is Hindustani. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that. India is my second home. I've been back and forth between India and the US multiple times. I mean, it's really wonderful. It's special. They're an amazing part of my life. I don't know who I would be without them, really.
Yeah.
So I am in the middle of editing this Q&A video right now, and I'm realizing that it went a lot longer than I expected. That very first question was a big one, and I wanted to give it the time and the space that I could answer the entire thing, but in doing so, I'm realizing that this video is getting pretty long, and instead of making an 2-hour long video, I'm going to break this up into a few chunks so that I can release it as I'm done editing it. So I just finished the first part. I'm going to add this at the tail of it, and then I will continue editing the next part, which will include more questions, and I promise all the answers to the following questions will not be as long as this first one. But I want to get to everyone's questions, and thank you again for submitting so many questions, because we did want to get to all of them, and we got to a ton of them, which is why the video is ending up being as long as it is. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you continue watching when we release the second part of this series, and I hope you're enjoying the story. All right, until next time.